Our next speaker is Dr. John Henry. He's a UMKC professor of economics with an emphasis on the history of economic thought. He spent most of his academic life in California State University in Sacramento. He's authored 2 books and many, many articles. He's been a visiting professor in Cambridge and in Staffordshire, England. And now we'll hear a different side of the legacy of war from Dr. Henry. Thank you.
I'm not so sure it'll be different, and I guarantee you it won't be better than the 2 presentations you've just heard. I'm a mere economist, and I never was in the military, and I never had these experiences. I read about them. I've known any number of veterans dating back to World War II and Vietnam in particular, right? And of course, know people from more recent activity, such as Mitch and Lucky as well. What?
A little louder, please, Dr. Henry.
I'll get to it. All right. Let me start out by explaining a bit why you should never listen to economists when they talk about costs. Okay, we start with the conventional position on costs. And these are usually associated with firms, private firms, hiring inputs, labor, etc., to produce output. Right? You measure the wage times the amount of labor hired, etc., and those are your costs of production in particular. Right? Now these are known as private costs. Okay? We don't pay much attention to those. We like to go a little further than that, and we say we'd like to deal with the social costs of production. Now, social costs of production include those costs that are the result of economic activity, but which are not borne by the firm or the producer of that economic activity. For example, pollution, right? You have a steel mill and it muddies the air, it muddies the water, causes cancers and whatever, and that raises the health costs, right? So we duly calculate the increased medical costs, etc. Those are the social costs of production. Right? Economists in particular like to talk about opportunity costs, right? If you're using these inputs, labor, etc., in one line of activity, you're not using them in some other line of activity. If you're building roads, you're not building hospitals, right? So the opportunity cost of building roads is really the hospitals that you aren't building, that are foregone, right? Those are opportunity costs, right? And that's what economists focus on. At least so they say. Now all the above is crap. In particular, opportunity costs. Because if you really have opportunity costs, you're assuming that the economy is producing as much as it possibly can produce. And therefore, if you produce something over here, you have to take resources from something over here. So you're giving something up to produce this. Okay? When was the last time you saw a capitalist economy? I don't care about the United States, England, France, Germany, whatever you want to call it. Last time a capitalist economy operated at full employment. The closest we've come in the last half century or more is a brief period during World War II. And even that wasn't a fully employed economy. And unless you have full employment, opportunity costs are irrelevant. Basically, the opportunity cost of building a hospital while building roads is zero. There are no costs. You just take unemployed labor, etc., and you put it to work building hospitals, schools, whatever you want to do. Okay? So forget economists initially. Write them out. You know, I've been talking to Mitch for a year now and telling him he's really a fool for pursuing a PhD in economics because it's all irrelevant. It's something of an exaggeration, but he understands what that means. Okay? In the real world, there are costs that fall outside all these categories. And this is particularly the case when it comes to war, right? Now, Lucky presented a number of figures, and I don't want to replicate them. Actually, I did. I was ready to replicate them. I don't want to replicate them, but I'll speak to them in a slightly different way, right? Or at least some of them in a slightly different way. But I want to take you back to 1990, because that's when the war against the Iraqi population began. This is not the 12th year anniversary? Ninth. It's the 22 year anniversry.
And then you can, there's the Iran-Iraq war before that too.
Well, I'm just talking about the U.S. direct involvement in Iraq, and that was under the elder Bush administration, not the younger Bush administration, right? In fact, I want to speak to that because there's a fundamental error in the way this program has been written up. There's two fundamental errors. All right. Okay, now, this was the war against the Ba'ath regime, the Ba'ath government in Iraq, the Hussein government as it came to be known. And it was launched Operation Desert Storm in 1990, followed by U.S. UN sanctions against the Iraqi population. Right? We say that they're UN sanctions, but they were really U.S. sanctions. All right, let's forget about the UN because it's irrelevant. A true story, right? It is. It's irrelevant, right? There was great hope at the end of World War II that we'd finally build an international organization that would produce the proper results for the world's population, the good results, right? We'd end war, we'd have abundance, etc., right? And that lasted about 2 months. All right, what did the sanctions do? The sanctions greatly reduced medical supplies, and we've heard evidence about that in the more recent period. Needed materials to build purposefully destroyed water treatment facilities and power plants. The destruction of the water treatment facilities and power plants was not an accident, right? These were targets. And these were targets directed against the Iraqi population. It had nothing to do with the nature of the government or whatever the case may be. U.S. or England, France, Germany. I don't want to isolate the United States or single out the United States government here, right? You go back and you look at the history of capitalism, and all of these capitalist governments will support the most reactionary dictatorial terrorist regimes imaginable and attempt to destroy any regime that challenges the authority of these capitalist states. And I'll come back to that, okay? So these sanctions, along with almost daily bombing raids, we tend to forget that. We tend to forget it. We were never told this. During the Clinton administration, a Democratic president with initially a Democratic Congress, right? Democratic with a big D, right? For dumb, right? Dastardly is more like it, right? Conducted bombing raids in Iraq on an almost daily basis. Right? So these sanctions, bombing raids, etc., resulted in an estimated 500,000 children under the age of 5 dying, either directly or indirectly from these sanctions, bombing raids. Now you can quarrel with the numbers, right? And the numbers are problematic, actually. I'll come back to that in a little bit. They're big, but they're probably not. Now, in 1996, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was asked on 60 Minutes, she was Secretary of State under Clinton, whether this price or cost, 500,000 children dead under the age of 5, was worth it. Her reply, and I quote, "I think this is a very hard choice, but the price, we think the price is worth it." Now, that statement was cited in only one relatively mainstream newspaper. The Orange County Register, Orange County, California, Southern California, very conservative, a libertarian newspaper that opposed the initial war against Iraq. Okay? Now, the more fundamental question is, who's we? 500,000 Iraqi, give or take, 500,000 Iraqi children under the age of 5 dead as a consequence of U.S. actions, U.S. government and military actions. We think the price is worth it. Madeleine Albright bore no cost. Clinton bore no cost. U.S. citizenry bore some costs, to be sure, but the costs were borne by the Iraqi population. And I think this captures the essence of the issue. What are the costs of the war in Iraq? What we should do, and Lucky and Mitch have done this, is focus on the number of deaths of both civilians and soldiers, the number of injured individuals, the loss of educational establishments, and with these, the loss of education. In 1990, Iraq had the highest literacy rate in the Middle East. Iraq was the most progressive country in the Middle East, the most secular country in the Middle East. Okay? It has now been turned into a backwater, right? And there's a reason for this, right? And it's a reason that has been evidenced through recent history, and not such recent history, but past history as well. We have a massive refugee population. What was your number? 2 million? That's the number I have, 2 million. But again, the numbers vary, right? They're large in any case.